I measured time in heartbeats first. My own, not his. The Emperor's heart, if it still functioned in any capacity biological organisms, would recognize, beat through machinery, regulated by systems I was forbidden to understand, maintained by tech priests whose red robes whispered across marble floors during maintenance cycles that occurred every 8 hours and 17 minutes. My heart beat 72 times per minute when I took my post. This would decrease over the coming century. Custodian physiology adapts to extended stillness, metabolism slowing, cardiovascular demands diminishing. By year 50, my resting heart rate would settle at 43 beats per minute. By year 90, 37. The body learning that movement was no longer required, that existence had reduced to observation and the holding of a position. I was Baldur's Get. Not literally, the Captain General who served during the unification was 10,000 years gone, but lineage-wise, my gene seed traced back through the original 300 custodians who stood at the Emperor's side during the conquest of Terra. This mattered to the custodian god. Lineage. Origin. The unbroken chain of service, stretching back to when the Emperor walked and spoke and led rather than rotting on a throne while machines breathed for him. My name was Aristeus. This would matter less with each passing decade. Names are for people who interact, who communicate, who exist in relation to others. I would spend the next century in a chamber where speech was forbidden, movement prohibited, interaction reduced to the observation of machinery and the slow degradation of something that used to be divine. The throne room measured 300 meters wide, 400 deep, 170 tall at its central dome. The golden throne itself dominated the chamber's heart. A massive construction of aramite and psychically reactive crystals, layered machinery, life support systems that extended through the floor and walls and ceiling, connecting to power sources buried kilometers beneath the imperial palace. 10,000 psychers died daily to fuel it. Their screaming was inaudible here. The throne room's acoustic engineering filtered everything except the Emperor's machinery, the tech priest's maintenance protocols, and the absolute silence required of those standing guard. I took my position at the throne room's eastern approach, one of 12 custodians stationed at cardinal and ordinal points around the chamber's perimeter. We stood in alcoves designed for this purpose, recessed spaces that kept us visible but architecturally subordinate to the throne itself. The alcove measured 3 meters deep, 2 wide, sufficient space for a custodian in full warplate, guardian spear held at attention, to stand without cramping. Insufficient space for anything resembling comfort. I wore the auramite plate I had earned during my 2nd century of service. After the Katara campaign, where 17 of us held a Hive City's stratagem against 6,000 heretics for 43 days until Imperial reinforcement arrived. The plate was masterwork, individually crafted, psychically attuned to my specific physiology, layered with protective wards that would resist everything except the most catastrophic damage. It weighed 83 kilograms. I would wear it without removal for 100 years. My guardian spear measured 2.8 meters from base to blade tip, its power field generator humming at a frequency of 127 hertz. Its integrated bolter loaded with vengeance rounds, mass reactive ammunition designed to detonate inside targets rather than pass through. I would never fire it during my posting, would never activate the power field. The spear existed as symbol, as tradition, as the weapon we carried because custodians always carried weapons, even when those weapons would never be deployed. The Emperor sat 30 meters away, visible through the forest of machinery that sustained him. I could see his face, what remained of it. The withered features barely recognizable as human, the skin like parchment stretched over skull, the eyes closed or perhaps no longer present behind lids that never opened. His body was skeletal, consumed by 10,000 years of sitting immobile, while his consciousness, if it still existed, fought battles in the immaterium that no one could observe or understand. I had seen him before. Every custodian did, during our final trial. They brought us here, made us look upon the master of mankind, showed us what divinity costs. Some candidates broke during that viewing, saw the corpse god rotting on his throne, and could not reconcile it with the Imperium's endless proclamations of the Emperor's glory and protection. Those candidates were removed, reassigned, their gene seed recycled into future generations that might demonstrate greater psychological resilience. I had not broken, had looked upon the Emperor's withered form and felt only what I was trained to feel: duty, purpose, the understanding that his condition was irrelevant to my function. I existed to serve. Service did not require the Emperor to be vital, glorious, or even particularly alive. Only that he existed, that the throne functioned, that the Imperium persisted. This was what separated custodians from space marines. The Astartes served the Emperor's vision, his goals, his plan for humanity's future. We served the Emperor himself, not his ideals, not his objectives. The actual being who had created us, who had engineered our gene seed in laboratories beneath Himalayan peaks, who had made us to be his companions and guardians. We didn't require him to be right, didn't need to believe his cause was just. We simply served because he made us to serve, and objects function according to their design. The first day passed in silence. I held my position, observed the Emperor's machinery, counted the tech priests who entered every 8 hours and 17 minutes, performing their maintenance rituals. 6 of them, always 6, wearing red robes marked with the cog skull icon of the Adeptus Mechanicus. They never spoke during maintenance, just moved through their protocols with mechanical precision, adjusting settings, replacing components, performing functions I was not trained to understand. One of them always approached nearest to the Emperor's body, would extend mechadendrites, the tentacle-like mechanical appendages grafted to his spine, and interface directly with systems buried in the throne's core. This tech priest's biological face was mostly gone, replaced by sensor arrays and data processing augmetics, but I could see organic tissue around his jawline. Skin that still produced sweat during the neural strain of interfacing with the Golden Throne's machine spirits. The tech priests completed their maintenance in 47 minutes, then withdrew. The chamber returned to silence, just the machinery's constant rhythm. The hum of power systems, the hiss of life support, the sounds I would learn to identify individually over the coming century. Night fell. The throne room had no windows. We existed kilometers beneath the palace's surface levels, but chronometers marked day and night cycles anyway. Imperial Standard Time maintained across all palace districts, keeping rhythm with Terra's actual rotation despite our subterranean isolation. I did not sleep. Custodians can function for weeks without sleep when required. Our physiology permits extended wakefulness, consciousness maintained through a combination of genetic engineering and training that teaches the mind to rest in sections, portions of the brain cycling through recovery, while others maintain awareness. The second day proceeded identically to the first. Maintenance at 8 hours 17 minutes, tech priests performing their protocols. Withdrawal, silence, the Emperor's machinery continuing its rhythm. On the third day, I noticed the sound. Not new. Present since my arrival, but my consciousness had only now isolated it from the general acoustic background. A clicking rhythm emerging from the life support systems connected to the Emperor's respiratory function. Click, hiss, repeating every 4.3 seconds. Mechanical breathing for lungs that no longer possessed strength to draw air independently. The clicking was irregular, not significantly, perhaps 0.03 seconds variance, but inconsistent. Machinery in optimal condition maintains precise rhythm. Variation indicates degradation, components wearing, systems struggling. I logged this observation internally, could not report it. Custodians posted to throne room guard maintained absolute silence, except in case of direct threat to the Emperor's person. Mechanical irregularity did not constitute direct threat. The tech priests would identify and correct it during their next maintenance cycle. They did not correct it. Maintenance occurred. The tech priests performed their protocols. Withdrew. The clicking continued, still irregular, still varying by 0.03 seconds per cycle. I watched more carefully during the next maintenance, observed the tech priest who interfaced most directly with the throne's core systems, watched his mechadendrites connect, watched data flow through the interface ports, watched his augmetic sensors process information I could not access. He registered the irregularity. I saw it in his body language. The slight pause as his processors identified the variance, the microscopic tilt of his head as he assessed the data. Then he continued his protocols without addressing it. Disconnected, withdrew with the others. The irregularity was not considered significant enough to repair. I understood then what the next century would involve. Not dramatic catastrophe, not sudden failure, just slow degradation. The Emperor's machinery grinding gradually toward failure, while tech priests performed maintenance that no longer maintained, just delayed. Each 8-hour cycle buying time that stretched toward an ending no one would acknowledge. My heart rate was 71 beats per minute now, already decreasing. Body adapting to extended stillness. I held my position and listened to the clicking that marked the Emperor's mechanical breathing. Year 3. My heart rate had decreased to 64 beats per minute. I no longer experienced hunger in any meaningful sense. Custodian metabolism had adapted fully, drawing sustenance from the minimal nutrition dispensed through the drug ports integrated into my armor. Once weekly, an automated system delivered measured compounds directly into my bloodstream. Proteins, carbohydrates, minerals, everything required to maintain muscle tissue and bone density and neural function. Nothing resembling food, nothing requiring teeth or digestion or the pleasure of consumption. The respiratory irregularity had worsened. The clicking now varied by 0.21 seconds. Still within parameters that prevented emergency intervention, but trending toward failure with mathematical certainty. I had begun identifying the machinery individually. The life support systems directly connected to the Emperor's body numbered 47 distinct components that I could observe. Each produced unique sounds, frequencies I learned to recognize. The respiratory system's irregular clicking, the circulatory pump's steady thrumming at 0.87 Hz, the neural interface system's high-frequency whine at approximately 19,000 Hz, just at the edge of my enhanced hearing. System 17 was failing. Not immediately, not catastrophically, just degrading with the same grinding inevitability as the respiratory apparatus. System 17 appeared to regulate the Emperor's metabolic processes, managing what remained of his biological functions. Its power draw fluctuated increasingly, the variance visible in the plasma feeds that glowed through transparent sections of the throne's infrastructure. The tech priests logged this during maintenance. I watched them interface with the monitoring systems, observed their data exchange, watched them classify the degradation as acceptable, with intolerance not requiring immediate replacement. They were triaging, making decisions about which systems to repair based on resource availability, component scarcity, the calculations required when maintaining a 10,000-year-old machine that had never been designed for 10,000-year operation. The Emperor was supposed to have finished his great work by now, was supposed to have transcended, achieved apotheosis, led humanity into whatever golden future he had envisioned during the unification. Instead, he rotted on his throne while tech priests calculated which degrading systems they could afford to ignore. I understood the logic. The Imperium was vast. Resources were finite. Millions of worlds required attention, protection, resources. The Golden Throne consumed extraordinary material, components that took decades to manufacture, materials available only from specific forge worlds. Tech priests, trained specifically for this maintenance, whose education spanned centuries. Every resource diverted to the throne represented resources unavailable for fleet construction, forge world production, the million grinding wars that kept the Imperium's borders intact. The Emperor's machinery failed slowly because maintaining it perfectly would require resources the Imperium needed for survival. We kept him alive minimally because keeping him alive maximally would kill us. This was the calculus no one spoke aloud, the math beneath every maintenance decision. Let System 17 degrade because replacing it now meant 3 fewer cruisers for Battlefleet Obscurus. Let the respiratory system's irregularity persist because correcting it required components needed for Mechanicus Forge world expansion into the Ghoul stars. The Emperor died slowly so the Imperium could live. I held my position and watched the God Corpse struggle to breathe. Year 9. Heart rate 53 beats per minute. I no longer experienced time as continuous flow. Hours blurred together. Days became indistinguishable. Only the maintenance cycles provided structure. Every 8 hours and 17 minutes, the tech priests arrived, breaking the monotony, providing something to observe beyond machinery slowly failing. The respiratory clicking now varied by 0.8 seconds, approaching full second variance. Within another decade, it would become critically irregular, requiring either replacement or acceptance that the Emperor's lungs would fail entirely, and his consciousness, if it persisted, would maintain itself through purely psychic means, the body fully dead. Awareness sustained only through will and the throne's reality-anchoring systems. I had noticed something else. The Emperor's chest moved, barely, perhaps half a centimeter's rise and fall per breath cycle. But movement nonetheless. Biological function persisting beneath the mechanical assistance, some fragment of his original physiology still struggling to perform. This disturbed me in ways I did not fully process. If the Emperor was entirely dead, entirely machine-sustained, his degradation was merely mechanical failure, equipment breaking down according to predictable timelines. But if he remained partially alive, partially biological, partially conscious within that withered form, then the respiratory system's failure meant something different. Meant he was suffocating. Slowly, over decades, perhaps over centuries. Biological lungs trying to draw air, failing, depending increasingly on machinery that clicked irregularly, that varied its rhythm, that might someday stop entirely. I did not know if he experienced this, did not know if consciousness persisted with sufficient clarity to register physical sensation. The Emperor was a being of psychic power that had touched the warp itself, that had made bargains with forces I was not cleared to know existed. Perhaps he experienced nothing physical. Perhaps his awareness operated entirely in the immaterium now, fighting eternal battles against chaos, while his body rotted as mere anchor point. Or perhaps he felt everything, felt every irregular breath, felt the machinery struggling, felt the slow suffocation advancing year by year while servants he had created 10,000 years ago stood 30 meters away and watched without helping, because helping was not what we were ordered to do. My orders were guard, not maintain, not intervene, not question whether machinery needed adjustment. Just stand, observe, prevent any threat from reaching him. No threats manifested. The throne room was secured by layers of defense that extended kilometers in every direction. To reach this chamber, an enemy would need to penetrate the imperial palace's outer defenses, breach 20 kilometers of underground fortification, pass through verification checkpoints staffed by custodians and Sisters of Silence, bypass psychic wards maintained by the Adeptus Astronomica, and somehow survive the immediate response of 300 custodians who would converge on any intrusion within seconds. No enemy had ever reached the throne room. No enemy would. The threats that actually endangered the Emperor were internal. Mechanical failure. Resource scarcity. The grinding arithmetic that calculated how long machinery could be left failing before repair became mandatory. I stood guard against threats that would never come while the actual threat, time itself, entropy, the universe's tendency toward disorder, killed him slowly in front of me. Year 15. The respiratory clicking now varied by 1.4 seconds, close to critical irregularity. The tech priests spent longer during maintenance cycles now, their diagnostics taking additional time as they assessed degradation rates, calculated remaining operational lifespan, made decisions about intervention timing. During one maintenance cycle, I watched the senior tech priest, identifiable by the additional augmetics and the cog mechanicus symbol embossed in gold rather than standard red on his chest plate, interface with the respiratory system directly. His mechadendrites connected to diagnostic ports I had not observed being accessed before. Data flowed for 17 minutes, long enough that the other tech priests paused their own protocols, waiting, their sensor arrays oriented toward their superior. Finally, the senior tech priest disconnected, made a gesture I did not understand, hand signals in the Mechanicus's private cant, communication outside my training. The other tech priests resumed their protocols. The group completed maintenance and withdrew. The respiratory irregularity continued unchanged. They had assessed it, calculated, decided against intervention. I understood why. The respiratory system was large, integrated deeply into the throne's infrastructure. Replacing it would require partial shutdown of connected systems, risk to the Emperor's stability, resources measured in years of manufacturing time and material that forge worlds needed for other purposes. The calculation was simple. Let it degrade further, extract more operational lifespan before the cost of replacement became unavoidable. Economical, logical, the optimal choice when maintaining impossible machinery with finite resources. The Emperor's breathing became more labored. I could hear it now during the brief moments between mechanical cycles. A rattling wheeze from lungs 10,000 years old, tissue that should have decayed millennia ago, sustained only by machinery and the psychic will of a being who could not be allowed to die because the Astronomicon would fail. The Imperium would fragment, 1,000,000 worlds would fall into darkness. He was kept alive because killing him meant killing everything, not because anyone believed he would recover, not because his life had value beyond function, just because his death was unaffordable. I held my position and counted my heartbeats. 50, 1 per minute now, decreasing toward some minimum where cardiovascular function would maintain itself with minimal effort, my body learning that I existed as statue, as architectural element, as silent witness to divine degradation. The Emperor's breathing rattled through its irregular rhythm. I could do nothing. I was ordered to do nothing. I did nothing. Year 2003, something changed in the machinery. Not catastrophic failure, not emergency requiring intervention, just change, sudden and absolute, in the way System 32 interfaced with a neural connection apparatus surrounding what remained of the Emperor's skull. The change occurred between maintenance cycles. No tech priests present. Just the normal machinery rhythm, then a pulse of energy visible through the throne's crystalline components, a flash of gold light that cascaded through the psychically reactive systems, then different sounds, higher frequency, changed timbre. System 32 managed the Emperor's cognitive interface with the Astronomicon, channeled his psychic awareness through the throne's amplification arrays, projected his consciousness across the galaxy as the beacon that allowed navigator travel. If System 32 failed completely, the Astronomicon would fail. Warp travel would become impossible beyond short jumps. The Imperium would fragment into isolated sectors, each cut off from reinforcement, from trade, from the coordination that made human space defensible. The system had not failed, had changed. I did not know if this was improvement or degradation. The sounds suggested increased power draw. System 32 pulling more energy from the throne's main power feeds, diverting resources from other systems to compensate for something. The next maintenance cycle, the tech priests noticed immediately. All 6 approached System 32, their sensor arrays active, mechadendrites interfacing with diagnostic ports. They remained connected for 93 minutes, far longer than standard maintenance. They were analyzing, calculating, attempting to determine what had changed and why. Eventually, they withdrew, made notations on data slates, performed no repairs. Whatever had changed in System 32, they classified it as acceptable, or at least not requiring immediate intervention. Over the following weeks, I observed the consequences. The Emperor's physical form remained unchanged, still skeletal, still motionless except for the minimal chest rise that marked mechanical breathing. But something in the throne room's atmosphere felt different. Not measurably. Not anything I could identify through enhanced senses or augmented perception. Just a sense of presence, as though consciousness observed from the withered form, as though attention focused outward for the first time in decades. I dismissed this as imagination. Custodians were engineered for psychological resilience, but 23 years of absolute stillness produced effects no amount of genetic modification could fully prevent. The mind seeks patterns, creates meaning where none exists, assigns consciousness to machinery, because consciousness is what we understand, what we are, what we project onto anything that moves or changes. The Emperor was not looking at me, was not aware of me, was perhaps not aware of anything beyond the Immaterium's eternal war. His consciousness, too fragmented and too vast to notice individual custodians, standing guard in a room he had not perceived as physical location for 10,000 years. But the feeling persisted. Presence, attention, something observing from behind closed eyelids and withered features. Year 2007, the respiratory system reached critical irregularity. Clicking variance exceeded 2 full seconds. The breathing had become visibly labored now. The chest movements increased to perhaps 2 centimeters per cycle, biological lungs struggling harder as mechanical assistance provided less reliable support. The tech priests finally intervened. Replacement required 12 hours. They brought components manufactured on Mars specifically for Golden Throne maintenance, auramite casings, psychically neutral ceramics, power conduits that glowed with the blue-white light of plasma containment. 6 tech priests became 20 during the replacement. Specialists summoned from the Mechanicus temples that existed in the palace's deeper levels, tech priests trained in procedures that might be performed once per century. Their knowledge maintained across generations, waiting for the moment when intervention became mandatory. They powered down system after system, creating redundancies, rerouting life support through backup apparatus that groaned under sudden load. The Emperor's breathing stopped entirely for 47 minutes while they disconnected the failing respiratory system and installed its replacement. During those 47 minutes, his chest did not move. No breath entered or left his body. Just absolute stillness, corpse-like, the biological functions suspended entirely. I watched and wondered if he had died during that suspension. If consciousness had finally dispersed, unable to maintain itself without the physical anchor of breath and heartbeat, if we would restart the machinery and find only corpse, only meat, the psychic presence that had sustained the Astronomicon for 10,000 years, finally burned away. The tech priests completed installation, initialized the new system. Power flowed. The respiratory apparatus engaged. Click, hiss, steady and precise, variance less than 0.01 seconds. Perfectly regular mechanical breathing. The Emperor's chest rose, fell, rose again. The biological lungs responding to mechanical assistance, drawing air once more, oxygenating blood that flowed through systems I could not see. He had not died, had persisted through the suspension. Consciousness proving itself independent of breath, maintaining despite physical cessation, demonstrating that whatever he had become, it transcended mere biology. I did not know if this was comforting or horrifying. The Emperor could not die even when he stopped breathing, could not escape even through the failure of physical systems, was trapped in his own immortality, his own transcendent nature, condemned to persist regardless of what his body did or did not do. The tech priests completed their work and withdrew. The throne room returned to its normal rhythm. The new respiratory system functioned precisely, without variance, providing regular breathing cycles that would last, according to Mechanicus estimates I had overheard during the replacement, approximately 70 years before requiring replacement again. 70 years. I would be gone by then. My posting lasted 100 years. Some other custodian would stand in this alcove, would watch the respiratory system degrade from perfect function back to critical irregularity. would observe while tech priests calculated whether replacement was affordable or if the Emperor could be allowed to suffocate a bit more. That custodian would do what I did. Stand. Watch. Guard against threats that never came while the actual threat killed slowly through mechanical degradation and resource scarcity. The cycle would continue. The Emperor would persist. The Imperium would calculate. The machinery would fail and be replaced, and fail again, forever. Because there was no alternative except acknowledging that the being we called divine was actually just corpse, sustained by technology we barely understood. Protected by warriors trained not to question why we protected something that could not recover, only degrade. Year 31. My heart rate had reached 47 beats per minute. I had stopped experiencing hunger entirely. My consciousness no longer registered the weekly nutrient delivery as meaningful event. My body simply continued functioning. The armor's waste management systems handled biological necessities automatically. I existed as pure awareness, anchored to position, purpose, reduced to observation. I began to understand what the next 69 years would involve. Not revelation, not dramatic change, just this. Endless observation, machinery continuing its rhythm, the Emperor's form remaining motionless, tech priests performing maintenance, time passing without meaning, without progression, just accumulation. I counted heartbeats. 47 per minute, 67,680 per day, 2,470,200 per month, 24,702,000 per year. By the end of my posting, I would have counted approximately 2,470,000,000 heartbeats, each one identical, each one meaningless, each one continuing because continuation was what hearts did, what custodians did, what the Imperium did despite the mounting evidence that continuation was all we were capable of, that progress was illusion, that we existed only to maintain, to persist, to protect a corpse because the alternative was admitting the entire enterprise had failed 10,000 years ago and we lacked courage to stop. The Emperor's breathing continued its mechanical rhythm. I held my position. The universe turned. Nothing changed. Year 42. Heart rate 43 beats per minute. I no longer tracked time through chronometers. The maintenance cycles provided sufficient structure. Every 8 hours and 17 minutes, tech priests arrived. Between arrivals, I existed in a state that resembled meditation, without being meditation. Consciousness maintained but not focused, awareness present but not engaged, simply observing without processing. System 17 finally failed, not during maintenance. Between cycles, during the 3rd hour after the tech priests withdrew, the metabolic regulator simply stopped. No warning cascade, no gradual degradation leading to predictable failure point. Just cessation, one moment functioning, next moment silent. The Emperor's body convulsed. Small movement, perhaps 5 centimeters, but movement nonetheless, the first I had observed beyond respiratory chest rise in 42 years. The withered form jerked against its restraints, neural impulses firing without proper metabolic regulation, biological systems receiving incorrect signals, the body attempting responses that machinery no longer coordinated. The convulsion lasted 8 seconds, then stopped. The form returned to its previous stillness. But something had changed in the throne room's atmosphere. Pressure. A sense of weight that pressed against my consciousness, psychic presence manifesting as physical sensation, awareness radiating from the golden throne with intensity I had never registered before. The Emperor was present, not merely existing, not merely anchored to the throne as biological component in mechanical system. Actually present, consciousness focused on this location, this moment, this failure of the machinery sustaining him. I felt his attention sweep across the chamber. Not looking, he had no eyes that functioned, but perceiving nonetheless, awareness touching each of the 12 custodians stationed at our positions. I felt his consciousness register my presence, recognize me, not as individual, not as Aristeas with lineage and history and identity, as component, as guardian, as one of the objects he had created 10,000 years ago to serve him, standing here still serving, still holding position while he rotted. Then his attention withdrew, turned inward or outward. I could not determine which. The pressure lifted. The throne room returned to normal atmospheric conditions. System 17 remained silent. 4 hours until the next maintenance cycle, I calculated the damage that might occur during that time. Metabolic regulation affected dozens of connected systems. Without proper coordination, the Emperor's remaining biological functions would receive incorrect resource distribution. Cells would begin dying. Not catastrophically. The body was so augmented, so far beyond baseline human physiology, that 4 hours of dysregulation would not cause total failure, but damage would accumulate. Tissue that might have persisted another century would degrade to requiring replacement within decades. I could not intervene. My orders were guard, not maintain. I possessed no training for interfacing with the Golden Throne's systems. I was warrior, not tech priest. Approaching the machinery would accomplish nothing except violating protocols that existed for reasons I was not cleared to fully understand. So I held position and watched the Emperor's body experience metabolic dysregulation for 4 hours, until the tech priests arrived and discovered System 17's failure through their diagnostic protocols. They worked for 18 hours, brought replacement components. Specialists again summoned from the deeper temples. They powered down connected systems, created redundancies, installed the new metabolic regulator, while the Emperor's body continued its minimal convulsions, neural impulses firing irregularly, biological processes struggling without proper coordination. During hour 14 of the repair, the Emperor's eyes opened. I saw it directly. Had line of sight past the tech priests working at the throne's base, past the machinery to the withered face and the eyes that had been closed for, I did not know how long. Decades, certainly. Perhaps centuries. Perhaps millennia. They were golden, not metaphorically. Actually golden, as though someone had poured molten metal into the sockets, and it had solidified as functional organs, inhuman and wrong and terrible to perceive. The eyes did not move, did not track or focus, simply remained open, staring at nothing, or at everything, or at something I could not perceive because I lacked the senses required to see what an entity like the Emperor saw. The tech priests did not notice. They continued their work, focused on the metabolic regulator's installation, unaware that the being they maintained had achieved some fragment of physical awareness, had forced eyelids open through will or reflex, or the simple grinding determination to perceive his own degradation. The eyes remained open for 6 hours, then closed, slowly, the withered lids descending across golden irises, consciousness withdrawing again to wherever it existed when not manifesting physically. The tech priests completed their work. System 17's replacement functioned correctly. The Emperor's body stopped convulsing, returned to its minimal motion, just the chest rise marking mechanical breathing. The tech priests withdrew. I remained in my position, staring at the closed eyes, wondering if he had seen me, if he had registered my presence as more than component, more than object. If somewhere in that vast consciousness fighting battles in the immaterium, some fragment recognized that the warriors he had created to guard him were still here, still serving, still watching him die, because dying was what he did now, and we were trained only to guard, not to save. Year 56, heart rate 39 beats per minute. I had begun experiencing temporal distortion. Hours would pass in what felt like minutes. Then minutes would extend to subjective hours. Time becoming elastic, consciousness no longer maintaining reliable chronometric awareness, my mind adapting to extended stillness by abandoning the fiction that time progressed linearly. The respiratory system I had watched them install at year 27 was beginning to show wear, not failure yet, just the early signs. Slight irregularity creeping back into the rhythm. 0.08 seconds variance. Nothing critical. Nothing requiring intervention. just the inevitable degradation that affected all machinery, the universe's tendency toward entropy, expressing itself in clicking that no longer maintained perfect precision. I calculated when it would fail. Approximately year 43 of the respiratory system's projected 70-year lifespan. 14 years from my current position. I would witness the degradation, but not the replacement. Would watch it decline from perfect function back toward critical irregularity, then be rotated out before the actual failure, some other custodian inheriting the observation of its final collapse. This bothered me in ways I did not fully understand. After 56 years, the respiratory system felt like companion. Something I had observed so continuously, tracked so carefully, that it had become relationship. I knew its rhythm better than I knew my own heartbeat. Could identify the exact moment in each cycle when the intake valve opened, when compressed air flooded the mechanical lungs, when exhalation began. The thought that I would leave before witnessing its failure felt like abandonment, like betraying something I had been entrusted to observe. I recognized this as irrational. The respiratory system was not conscious, did not care whether I observed its failure. My presence made no difference to its function or degradation, yet the feeling persisted. After 56 years of watching, leaving felt wrong. Year 61, another catastrophic failure. System 9 this time. The circulatory pump that maintained blood pressure throughout the Emperor's remaining vascular system. It ceased during operation, the mechanical heart simply stopping mid-cycle, leaving blood pooled in lower extremities, the brain receiving no oxygenated flow. The Emperor's body did not convulse this time, just went utterly slack. The minimal tension that had kept the form upright against its restraints disappearing, the withered frame collapsing forward as far as the binding systems permitted. His consciousness remained present. I felt it, stronger than during System 17's failure, a psychic pressure so intense that reality felt thin. As though the material universe was just membrane separating this space from the immaterium, and the Emperor's awareness might tear through it with simple attention. The pressure built for 90 seconds while the circulatory pump remained seized, 90 seconds without blood flow to the brain. 90 seconds of biological death occurring to a being who could not die because his consciousness existed independently of biological function, sustained by psychic power and will and the throne's reality anchoring systems. Then System 9 restarted, not through tech priest intervention, they had not yet arrived, through something else. Through the Emperor's will forcing machinery to function, psychic energy translated into mechanical action. Consciousness reaching into physical systems and commanding them to continue because stopping was not permitted, was not possible, would never be allowed, while the Imperium required the Astronomican's light. The circulatory pump resumed its rhythm. Blood flowed. The Emperor's body straightened slightly, regaining its minimal tension. The psychic pressure diminished. When the tech priests arrived for their next maintenance cycle, they discovered System 9's temporary failure through their diagnostics, examined it carefully, found no mechanical explanation for the seizure or the restart, logged it as anomalous event, continued their protocols. They did not replace System 9. It had restarted. It functioned. Whatever had caused the temporary failure had apparently resolved itself. No need to expend resources replacing a system that worked. I understood what I had witnessed, the Emperor maintaining his own machinery now, not through tech priest intervention, not through mechanicus expertise. Through raw psychic force, consciousness reaching into physical systems and compelling them to continue regardless of mechanical degradation or logical failure points. He could not die. Even when his machinery failed, he would force it to restart, would sustain himself through will because the alternative was Astronomican failure, Imperium collapse, a million worlds falling into darkness. He had no choice except continuation, no freedom except persisting, no escape except maintaining this corpse existence forever, because 10,000 years ago he had made himself necessary and necessity was prison. I held my position and watched a god trapped in his own importance, condemned to persist by the fact that he had made himself indispensable, that the machinery of human empire could not function without his slow suffocation at its center. Year 73. Heart rate, 37 beats per minute. Approaching my physiological minimum, my body had adapted fully to stillness, metabolism running at levels barely sufficient for consciousness maintenance. I no longer experienced muscle fatigue, no longer felt my legs supporting my weight. The armor had become environment, the alcove had become universe, and existence had reduced to observation without sensation. The respiratory system's variance had reached 0.43 seconds, accelerating toward failure. I calculated 18 more years before critical irregularity. I would be gone in 27 years. Would miss the failure by 9 years. This still bothered me, more than it should. I had begun speaking to the respiratory system during the empty hours between maintenance cycles. Not aloud, sound was forbidden. But internally, consciousness directed toward the machinery as though it could perceive my attention. I told it about Katara, about the Hive City stratagem where 17 of us held against 6,000 heretics for 43 days, about the way the enemy had come in waves, how we had killed until our guardian spears overheated, until bolter ammunition exhausted, until we fought with blades and fists, and the absolute determination that custodians did not break regardless of numbers or odds. I told the respiratory system about my gene lineage, about Valdor and the original 300, about the tradition I inherited, the standards I was supposed to maintain, about how standing in this alcove for a century counted as service equivalent to Katara, though it felt nothing like combat, nothing like victory, just endless observation of machinery degrading. I told it I was sorry I would not be here for its failure, that I would have witnessed it if I could, that some other custodian would stand here and observe its final collapse, but that custodian would not know it like I knew it, would not have counted every cycle for 73 years, would not understand its specific rhythm and degradation pattern. The respiratory system did not respond, just continued its clicking, 0.43 seconds variance, grinding toward failure whether I observed or not. I recognized this as madness, understood that 73 years of isolation had produced psychological effects that genetic engineering could not fully prevent. Custodians were designed for combat, for movement, for the dynamic application of violence in defense of the Emperor's person. We were not designed for motionless observation. Our resilience had limits. I was approaching mine. 27 years remaining, I would maintain, would hold position, would complete my posting because custodians completed what they began. But something in my consciousness had fractured, had started speaking to machinery, had begun assigning importance to a respiratory system's failure as though it mattered, as though anything I observed here mattered beyond the basic requirement that I stand guard against threats that never came. Year 88. The Emperor opened his eyes again, not during emergency or system failure, during normal operation between maintenance cycles, without apparent cause. The golden eyes simply opened, staring forward, awareness radiating from them with intensity that made the throne room's atmosphere feel thick. They remained open for 16 days. I watched continuously, unable to look away despite the absence of actual change. The eyes did not move, did not blink, just stared at whatever they perceived. Sometimes I felt his attention sweep across me, consciousness registering my presence before moving on. Other times the attention felt distant, focused on things occurring light years away, battles in the Immersive, the million grinding necessities of maintaining the Astronomicon. During day 12 of this, I witnessed something I could not explain. The Emperor's lips moved, just slightly, barely perceptible motion of withered tissue, the mouth shaping something that might have been words if he had possessed breath to voice them. I did not know if he was speaking, did not know if the lip movement was intentional or just muscular reflex, neurons firing randomly in tissue 10,000 years old. But I watched carefully, trying to determine if the shapes matched any language I knew. They did not. The movement was too slight, too irregular. Or perhaps the language was too old, something from the age of strife or before. Linguistic structures that no living human knew because the Emperor was older than any human linguistic tradition, had watched languages evolve and die and be born again across 30,000 years of existence. The lips stopped moving. The eyes remained open. Awareness continued radiating from the withered form. Consciousness vast enough to perceive entire sectors simultaneously. Focused enough to maintain individual identity after 10,000 years of machine-bound existence. On day 16, the eyes closed. Slowly. The awareness withdrawing or turning inward, attention directed elsewhere. The throne room returning to its normal state. The tech priests arrived 3 hours later for routine maintenance. Noticed nothing unusual. The Emperor's biological signs remained within acceptable parameters. The machinery functioned correctly. Nothing in their diagnostics indicated the eyes had opened or lips had moved. They completed their protocols and withdrew. I remained staring at the closed eyes, wondering what he had been trying to say. Wondering if it mattered. Wondering if divine consciousness attempting to communicate through withered lips was more or less pathetic than custodian consciousness speaking to respiratory systems about campaign memories and gene lineage. We were all trapped here, the Emperor in his machinery, I in my alcove, the tech priests in their maintenance protocols, the Imperium in its grinding necessity, all of us serving because continuation was all we knew, because stopping would mean acknowledging that the Enterprise had failed millennia ago, and we lacked courage to admit it. Year 94, heart rate 37 beats per minute, unchanged from year 73. I had reached my physiological minimum. My body would maintain this level until posting completion or death, whichever came first. The respiratory system's variance had reached 1.1 seconds, entering the range that would be classified as concerning during next maintenance assessment. 8 years until critical irregularity. I would be gone in 6 years. Would definitely miss the failure now. I had stopped speaking to it. Not because the madness had passed, because I had nothing left to say. Had told it everything about Katara, about gene lineage, about the 73 years of observation and the way time distorted and the Emperor's eyes opening and closing. Had explained that I was sorry for leaving, that I wished I could stay. That service had meant something once, but now just meant standing still while God suffocated and machinery failed and the universe demonstrated that nothing persisted except through grinding application of will against entropy. The respiratory system did not care, continued its rhythm. 1.1 seconds variance, degrading toward failure whether I observed or spoke or stood silent. I counted my remaining heartbeats, 37 per minute. 1,946,880 per year, 11,681,280 until posting completion. Each one identical to the previous, each one meaningless except as increment toward release. Year 97, System 32, the neural interface managing the Astronomicon connection, began exhibiting the same changes I had observed at year 23. Power draw increasing. Frequency shifts in the psychic resonance that hummed through the throne's crystalline components. The Emperor's consciousness pressing more heavily against reality, presence intensifying. The tech priests noticed during maintenance, spent 4 hours analyzing, made notations, performed no intervention. Whatever was happening in System 32, they classified it as acceptable variance. Over the following weeks, the presence intensified further. The throne room's atmosphere felt thick constantly now. Psychic pressure maintained at levels that made reality feel negotiable, as though physical laws were just suggestions that consciousness could ignore if it pressed hard enough. I felt the Emperor's awareness sweep across me repeatedly, not merely registering my presence, actually observing me, studying me. Analyzing the custodian who had stood in this alcove for 97 years, who had watched him degrade, who had counted heartbeats and spoken to machinery and slowly gone mad in the specific way that objects went mad when used beyond their design parameters. I wondered if he pitied me, if divine consciousness recognized the damage that extended isolation produced. If somewhere in his vast awareness, some fragment regretted creating warriors who were then assigned to stand motionless for centuries, watching their creator rot while forbidden to help, or intervene, or even speak. Or perhaps he felt nothing about me. Perhaps I registered as furniture, as architectural element that happened to possess consciousness, as component in the broader system of imperial defense, relevant only as functional element, my interior experience utterly irrelevant to the calculations that governed his decision-making. I did not know which possibility was worse. Year 99. The respiratory system's variance reached 1.8 seconds. Approaching critical. The tech priests discussed replacement during their maintenance cycle. I could not hear their words. They communicated through mechanicus cant, hand signals, and binaric pulses I was not trained to interpret. But I saw their attention focused on the respiratory system, saw them interface with diagnostic ports, saw them calculate. They decided to wait 1 more year. Extract maximum operational lifespan before expending resources on replacement. The system would likely reach critical irregularity within 18 months. I would be gone in 12 months. Replacement would occur after my departure. I would never witness it, would never see the new system installed, never hear the perfect clicking rhythm restored, would leave while the degradation continued, while the Emperor's mechanical breathing became more labored, while the slow suffocation advanced another increment. This should not have mattered. The respiratory system's replacement was not my concern. My posting was guard duty. Observation without intervention. I had no responsibility for maintenance outcomes, no investment in whether systems were replaced promptly or allowed to degrade until failure. But it felt like abandonment, like I was betraying something I had been entrusted to protect, even though protection had never been my actual assignment. Year 100. My replacement arrived during the morning maintenance cycle. Custodian Theron, gene lineage traced to Aquilon, 3rd century of service. He entered the throne room accompanied by the shift captain, received briefing on protocols and expectations, then approached my alcove. I had not moved in 100 years. My armor had not been removed. My guardian spear had not shifted position. I had become part of the alcove's architecture, motionless for so long that Theron likely needed a moment to recognize I was alive rather than statue. Custodian Aristeas, Theron said, speaking directly to me, first words I had heard directed at my person in a century. Your posting is complete. You are relieved. Found that my voice did not function. 100 years without speaking had atrophied the neural pathways controlling vocalization. My consciousness formed words, but my throat produced only silence. Theron understood. Had been briefed on what extended isolation produced. No response required. Step down. Medical servitors will escort you to debriefing. I attempted to move. Found that my body did not respond correctly. Muscles had atrophied despite genetic engineering and regular nutrient delivery. Neural connections between intention and action had degraded. I could not simply step down, had to relearn movement, had to reconstruct the pathways that allowed consciousness to direct physical action. It took 47 minutes to exit the alcove, each movement deliberate, careful, my consciousness re-engaging with physicality after a century of purely observational existence. Theron waited patiently, holding position, understanding that this was normal, that all custodians completing throne room postings required time to remember how bodies functioned. I finally stood outside the alcove, turned, looked back at the position I had occupied for 100 years. The alcove appeared unchanged, would appear unchanged after Theron stood there for his century, would appear unchanged after 1,000 custodians cycled through, each standing motionless, each watching the Emperor degrade, each counting heartbeats until relief came. I looked at the golden throne. at the Emperor's withered form, motionless except for the mechanical breathing's rhythm, at the closed eyes that had opened twice during my posting, at the machinery that clicked and hummed and slowly failed while tech priests calculated how long failure could be tolerated. I wanted to speak to him, wanted to say something that would matter after 100 years of enforced silence. Wanted to tell him that I had served, that I had watched, that I would carry the image of his slow suffocation for whatever centuries of service remained to me. But I had no voice, and he had no awareness of me that would register individual testimony. And there was nothing to say that would change anything, that would matter, that would alter the grinding reality that he was trapped in machinery and I was trapped in service, and the Imperium was trapped in the necessity that kept both of us imprisoned. I turned and followed the medical servitors toward debriefing. Behind me, Theron stepped into the alcove, assumed the position, began his own century of observation. The respiratory system continued its irregular clicking, 1.9 seconds variance now, 18 months until critical failure. Theron would witness what I could not, would observe the replacement I had missed by 12 months, would see the new system installed, would hear the perfect rhythm restored, would watch it degrade again over his own century of service. The cycle continued, would continue, would never stop continuing because stopping meant admitting the entire enterprise was futile, and futility was the one truth the Imperium could not afford to acknowledge. Debriefing took 60 days, medical servitors rebuilding atrophied musculature, tech priests examining my armor for degradation after a century of continuous wear, chaplains assessing psychological state, determining whether my consciousness remained functional or had fractured beyond repair during extended isolation. I relearned speech during week 3. The words came slowly at first, consciousness remembering how to direct the neural impulses, throat remembering how to shape sound. My voice sounded wrong, too quiet, too uncertain, as though I had forgotten what voices were for. The chaplain conducting my assessment asked standard questions. Could I identify myself? Could I recall my posting assignment? Could I describe what I had observed during my century of service? I described the machinery, the systems that had failed, the Emperor's eyes opening, the respiratory system's degradation pattern. I provided technical details, precise observations, everything I had archived during 100 years of continuous observation. The chaplain made notations, asked if I had experienced any religious visions, any direct communication from the Emperor, any sense of divine presence beyond normal parameters. I told the truth. Yes, presence, particularly during system failures and during the period when System 32 exhibited increased activity. The Emperor's consciousness manifesting as psychic pressure, as attention sweeping across the throne room, as awareness vast enough to fight battles across the galaxy, while simultaneously maintaining some fragment of attention on the physical space where his body slowly died. The chaplain classified this as normal. All custodians completing throne room postings reported similar experiences. The Emperor's consciousness was vast. It touched everything. Feeling his presence during extended proximity to the Golden Throne was expected, even required. It proved the Emperor persisted, that consciousness maintained itself despite physical degradation. I asked the question that had formed during my century of observation, asked it carefully, uncertain whether speaking it constituted heresy or simply honesty. Does he suffer? The chaplain paused, looked at me with the expression I would come to recognize over following decades, the look of someone deciding whether truth or doctrine served better. He chose doctrine. The Emperor exists beyond suffering. His consciousness operates at levels we cannot comprehend. Physical sensation is irrelevant to beings of such power. His body degrades. The respiratory system struggles. Does consciousness perceive this? Does awareness register the slow failure, even if it transcends pain? I watched him for 100 years. I observed every system failure. I felt his presence intensify during failures, as though awareness focused more heavily on physical existence when machinery stopped functioning correctly. If he perceives this, if consciousness registers the degradation, then he accepts it as necessary. The chaplain interrupted. As sacrifice required for the Imperium's continuation. As the price of maintaining the Astronomicon, your concern is noted but irrelevant. The Emperor's interior experience is not your burden to assess. I understood the message. Stop asking. Stop questioning. Return to service and accept that some truths were above my station, beyond my need to know, deliberately obscured because acknowledging them might produce exactly the psychological fracture the chaplain was assessing me for. I stopped asking. Debriefing completed at day 60. I was cleared for return to active duty, psychologically resilient, physically restored, ready to resume normal custodian operations after 100 years of isolation. They assigned me to the Shadow Keepers, the custodian order that guarded the dark cells beneath the Imperial Palace that maintained watch over imprisoned entities and forbidden artifacts, that stood vigil over things the Imperium had locked away because destroying them was impossible, and forgetting them was dangerous. I understood the assignment. They placed broken custodians with the Shadow Keepers, warriors who had seen too much, who asked questions that indicated fractured worldview, who could still serve but could not be trusted in normal operations. We were reliable, could hold positions, follow protocols, maintain discipline. But something in us had failed in ways that made us unsuitable for regular duty. I served with the Shadow Keepers for the next 3 centuries, stood guard outside cells containing entities I was not cleared to understand, watched doors that never opened, prevented access to artifacts that had been sealed before the Imperium existed. It was similar to throne room duty, endless observation, threats that never manifested. Standing still while time passed and nothing changed except my own degradation, consciousness slowly accepting that this was all service meant now, that I would never return to Katara's glory. Never again experience the purpose that came from active combat, just hold positions forever, because holding positions was what broken custodians did. But I could not forget the sound. The respiratory system's clicking rhythm haunted me. During the empty hours standing guard over sealed cells, I heard it. Phantom auditory memory, consciousness replaying the sound it had observed for 100 years. Click, hiss, irregular, 1.9 seconds variance, grinding toward failure I had not witnessed. I wondered if Theron had observed the replacement, if the new system functioned correctly. If the Emperor's breathing had become regular again, or if the tech priests had decided to let the system degrade further, extract more operational life, let the suffocation advance another few years. I wondered if the Emperor's eyes had opened during Theron's posting, if he had tried to speak again. If consciousness manifested more frequently now, physical awareness intensifying as the body degraded. Some correlation between mechanical failure and conscious presence that made suffering visible, despite the chaplain's insistence that suffering was irrelevant to beings of such power. I wondered if wondering about this constituted the psychological fracture that made me unsuitable for normal duty, or if all custodians posted to the throne room carried similar obsessions afterward. Voices haunted by machinery sounds, consciousness unable to process what we had witnessed without trying to assign meaning, that doctrine said did not exist. Year 403 of my service, I received notification that Custodian Theron had completed his posting, had been relieved, had undergone debriefing, and been cleared for return to active duty. I requested meeting with him, unofficial. Personal communication between custodians without tactical necessity. The request was approved. Shadow Keepers had fewer restrictions on personal conduct than standard custodian orders, recognition that we were already compromised, that additional damage was unlikely. I met Theron in one of the palace's meditation chambers, private space where custodians could process combat trauma or service complications without official oversight. He looked older. 100 years of stillness had marked him the same way it marked me. Something in the eyes, distance, awareness that had seen too much of nothing, had watched divine degradation until it became normal. "The respiratory system," I said without preamble. "Did it fail?" Theron understood immediately what I asked. Year 16 of my posting. They replaced it. Took 19 hours. The new system functioned perfectly. Relief flooded through me. Irrational, inappropriate, but real nonetheless. How long until degradation began? Approximately year 40. 0.05 seconds variance by year 60. 0.3 by year 80. He paused. Approximately 1.4 seconds variance when I departed. Critical irregularity projected for year 137 of the current system's operation. Theron had departed recently. The current system would reach critical failure in approximately 37 years. Some custodian currently standing in that alcove would witness what both Theron and I had missed: the final collapse, the emergency replacement. The moment when mechanical breathing stopped entirely and the Emperor's consciousness forced the system to restart through psychic will alone. "His eyes," I said. "Did they open?" 3 times during my posting. Once at year 27, once at year 73. Once at year 99. Theron's voice carried the same distance I heard in my own. The final time, he looked directly at me. Not past me, not through me. At me. His consciousness focused entirely on my specific existence for 17 seconds. I felt him perceive everything about me. Gene lineage, service history, the century I had spent watching him. He saw all of it, acknowledged it. Then his eyes closed, and I was alone again. Did he speak? His lips moved. Year 93. Shaped words I could not interpret. I reviewed linguistic databases afterward, attempting to identify the language. Found no match. Either he spoke something predating all recorded human languages, or the lip movement was involuntary. Or he communicated in ways that require senses we do not possess. We stood in silence for long minutes. 2 custodians who had served the same posting a century apart, who had observed the same degradation, who carried the same haunting questions about what we had witnessed. "Does it fade?" I finally asked. "The sound, the memory of his breathing. Does consciousness stop replaying it?" "No," Theron said. 300 years from now, you will still hear it. The clicking will remain perfect in your auditory memory. You will count variance during guard duty, during combat, during every empty moment when consciousness has nothing else to process. It never fades. We carry it until service ends. Why we were assigned this duty. Why custodians were required to stand motionless for centuries watching the Emperor die. What purpose does it serve? We prevent no threats, assist no maintenance, just observe while he degrades. Why? Theron met my eyes. Custodian to custodian, brothers in the specific damnation of having witnessed divine suffering without capacity to intervene. "Because someone must know," he said. "The Imperium tells itself the Emperor protects, that he guides us, that his consciousness maintains itself perfectly despite physical form. But someone must know the truth, must witness the actual cost, the slow death that buys another day of astronomican function, the suffocation that continues because stopping means a million worlds fall into darkness. And that someone is us. That someone is us. We stand witness. We carry the knowledge. We continue serving afterward because the alternative is admitting that what we witnessed makes service meaningless, and we cannot afford that admission. So we serve. We protect, we maintain. We perform our duties exactly as before, carrying the truth that the Imperium's foundation is corpse slowly dying, that protection is illusion, that the Emperor does not guide us because he cannot, can barely maintain his own machinery, requires tech priests to calculate which system failures are affordable and which require intervention. And we never speak this truth. We never speak it, Theron confirmed. Because speaking it accomplishes nothing except spreading the knowledge that breaks people. Better to carry it alone, to serve despite knowing, to protect an Imperium that worships a god who cannot help them, cannot save them, can only persist while we hold our positions, and pretend that continuation is victory. He left. I remained in the meditation chamber, staring at walls inscribed with the names of custodians who had fallen in the Emperor's service. 10,000 years of names. Millions of warriors who had died protecting the master of mankind, believing he would lead humanity to glory, believing their sacrifice mattered. I wondered how many had served throne room duty. How many carried the same knowledge Theron and I carried? How many heard the respiratory clicking during empty hours, counted heartbeats against inevitable failure? Served despite knowing the Emperor they protected was trapped in his own immortality, unable to die, unable to live, just persisting because persistence was all that remained. I returned to my post outside the dark cells, resumed my vigil, held my position while centuries passed and nothing changed except my own interior degradation, consciousness slowly calcifying around the truth that service had no meaning except the meaning we imposed through refusing to stop. The respiratory clicking continued in my memory. Click, hiss, irregular, struggling, the sound of divine suffocation, of necessity without mercy, of continuation as torture. I would carry it until service ended. Service would not end. Therefore, I would carry it forever. Year 706 of my service. I received orders assigning me to perimeter defense. The Shadow Keepers were deploying a century of warriors to patrol the palace's outer districts, additional security during a period of increased threat assessment. I was selected due to my combat experience at Katara, my demonstrated capability with Guardian Spear in close quarters engagement. I was returning to active duty, real combat operations, not guard duty, not observation, not standing vigil over sealed cells or dying guards. Actual service that involved movement, decision-making, the application of violence in defense of the Imperium. I reported to the deployment briefing and realized I felt nothing, no anticipation, no satisfaction at returning to purposeful action. Just empty acknowledgement that orders had changed, that I would perform new duties with the same mechanical precision I had performed every duty since watching the Emperor struggle to breathe for 100 years. The briefing covered standard protocols, patrol routes, threat assessment criteria, rules of engagement, nothing I had not learned during my initial training 6 centuries ago. I processed the information and filed it appropriately, consciousness going through motions without investment. During the briefing's conclusion, the officer conducting it asked if anyone had questions. I raised my hand, spoke for the first time in months. Does it matter? The officer paused. Does what matter, Custodian Aristeas? Any of this, the patrols, the threat assessment, the defense of the palace, does it matter? Does our service accomplish anything beyond continuation? Does protecting the Emperor mean anything when the Emperor cannot recover, cannot improve, can only degrade further regardless of how perfectly we perform our duties? Silence filled the briefing chamber. The other custodians stared at me. The officer's expression cycled through confusion, recognition, then something resembling pity. Custodian Aristeas, you are dismissed from this deployment. Return to your previous posting. Report to the chaplain for psychological assessment. I stood, saluted, left the briefing chamber, knew what the assessment would determine. That I had finally fractured completely. That 100 years of watching divine suffocation had produced exactly the psychological damage they had been monitoring since my original debriefing. That I was no longer suitable for any duty, except standing still in places where my questions could not contaminate other warriors. The chaplain's assessment took 6 hours. Same questions as before. Could I identify myself? Could I recall my service history? Could I explain why I had asked whether service mattered during a tactical briefing in front of 40 other custodians? I told the truth. That I could not forget the Emperor's breathing. That 6 centuries had not diminished the auditory memory. That I heard him suffocating during every moment of silence, during every guard shift. During every period when consciousness had nothing to occupy it except replaying the sound of divine machinery struggling and failing, and being replaced and failing again. That I had served for 7 centuries and could no longer identify purpose beyond simple continuation. That continuation was all the Imperium did now. Not progress, not victory, not achievement. Just grinding persistence in the face of entropy that would eventually consume everything regardless of how many custodians stood guard or how many centuries we held our positions. The chaplain listened, made notations, asked if I wanted to stop serving. I considered this. The question implied choice, implied agency, implied that custodians could decide whether to continue. That we were gene-forged for service, created specifically to guard the Emperor. We could no more choose to stop serving than the respiratory system could choose to stop clicking. Function was what we were, not what we did. No, I said. I don't want to stop. I want it to matter. I want 7 centuries of service to have accomplished something beyond delaying inevitable failure. I want the Emperor I watched suffocate to be something other than corpse sustained by machinery and desperation. But you will continue serving regardless, because I was designed for service. Because stopping meant admitting the truth that the entire enterprise was futile. Because continuation was easier than confronting meaninglessness. Because 700 years of service had to mean something, even if that something was just proving that custodians continued until dissolution, that we held our positions until death or obsolescence, that we served without requiring meaning or purpose or hope. Because the alternative is unacceptable, I finally said. The chaplain nodded, made his final notation. You are cleared for continued service with the Shadow Keepers. Permanent assignment. No rotation to active combat operations. You will stand vigil over the dark cells for the remainder of your operational lifespan. Is this understood? Yes. To the sealed door I had guarded for 3 centuries. To the vigil that would continue for whatever centuries remained to me. To the service that meant nothing except that it continued. The respiratory clicking played in my memory. Click, hiss, irregular, eternal. The sound of divine imprisonment, of consciousness trapped in machinery, of existence reduced to persistence without purpose. I held my position and counted heartbeats. 37 per minute. 1,946,880,000 per year. By year 1,000 of my service, I would have counted 73,461,000,000 heartbeats, each one identical, each one meaningless, each one continuing because continuation was what hearts did, what custodians did, what the Imperium did despite knowing that the Emperor we served was corpse god rotting on golden throne. That protection was fiction. That service was just elaborate denial of the truth, that everything had ended 10,000 years ago, and we lacked courage to acknowledge it. I exist now as guardian of sealed doors that never open, as witness to truth that cannot be spoken, as consciousness that carries the sound of divine suffocation and cannot escape it, cannot forget it, cannot do anything except serve, despite knowing service accomplishes nothing except continuation. The Emperor dies slowly on his golden throne. Machinery fails and is replaced, and fails again. Tech priests calculate which failures are affordable. Custodians stand guard for centuries watching, unable to intervene, forbidden to help. And I hear him breathing, always. The clicking rhythm that varies irregularly, that struggles and fails and restarts, that marks each moment of his trapped existence. I know what the Imperium costs. Know what its foundation is built upon. Know that the god we worship is corpse sustained by desperation, and the grinding calculus that his death is unaffordable even though his life is torture. I know this, and I serve anyway, because the alternative is admitting that 700 years of service meant nothing. Because continuation is all that remains when meaning fails. Because I am custodian, and custodians serve until dissolution. The respiratory system clicks in my memory. I hold my position. The Imperium continues. Nothing will ever change. This is what service means. This is what the Emperor costs. This is what we are. Click hiss, forever.